I want to join several of my colleagues today referencing that we're approaching tax day. It's not a day that Americans look forward to, but it's part of our responsibilities. The old joke about the two things that are sure, death and taxes, are still certain for all of us. But it is interesting this year to be able to approach this tax season under the first year of everyone filing under the new tax law. It's been fascinating to be able to see some of the stories and to read some of the print stories about what some of the media is saying, in the national media in particular, about the tax law. They're so desperate to be able to find anything to be able to criticize. It's fascinating to me to be able to read the headlines versus the stories. This story in particular, the headline was, "This is going to wipe us out," in reference to the new tax law. When you read through the story and find out this is who they say is going to get wiped out, here's their illustration of the person. A person moving from a $400,000 house this past year to one valued at $1.1 million concedes he has a first world problem of his taxes going up, but he says owing more in taxes is a little disheartening as he moves from a $400,000 house to a $1.1 million home. Now again, I'm excited for him in his home. I'm sure that it's beautiful, but that was their illustration of who's going to get hard hit by the tax changes on it. This article from National Source said, "Is a tax refund ahead for you in 2019? Some taxpayers received a tax bill instead." You go into the middle of the story and they make this one little note: only about 5% of taxpayers are expected to pay more under the new law. Or in other words, 95% of Americans, even in this story, that's a negative story about the taxes, they hide the simple fact that 95% of Americans will pay the same or less. The vast majority of those will pay less in their taxes for the next year. Or how about this one? Here's another national story that came out. Small business owners struggling to understand Trump's new tax law. And when you get down to literally the last line of the story, it ends like this with this same small business owner. "I don't know yet if it's going to impact my cash flow the way I have to put money back aside for this year because I'm not sure. I may even do better under the tax law. I don't know yet." That was their whole story, to say that people are struggling under this new tax law. It was just the uncertainty. What am I finding in Oklahoma? I'm finding more jobs and more opportunity across the state. This is not some accident of history. This is the direct result of a change in the tax law. And I'm quite confident that my liberal colleagues have all been very excited to be able to find something to be able to complain about through this process, but they failed to overlook the simple fact that this one story buries 95% of Americans do the same or better under this tax law, and the vast majority of those doing better under the tax law. It was interesting. There was a Vox tweet that came out from a news source from one of the reporters that made this one comment this past week saying, "Nobody likes to give themselves crediting for the kind of messaging success, but progressive groups did a really good job of convincing people that Trump raised their taxes when the facts say a clear majority got a tax cut." Or my favorite, the left-leaning Tax Policy Center had to begrudgingly study the tax cut and what's actually happening and say middle-class taxes actually went down. Families kept almost $1,000 more than would have previously gone into government coffers. What happened as a result of that? As a result of people keeping their own money and the withholding tables changing this past year so that each month people are actually keeping more of their own money? Well, here's what happened. Our GDP grew at 3% a year, a dramatic increase from what we've had in the past. Inflation-adjusted business investment went up 7% just since the tax cut. 215,000 new jobs have started on average every month since the tax cut change happened. 215,000. Those are very strong numbers across the country. Unemployment has gone to 3.9% since the enactment of the tax reform. Beginning in April of last year, the number of job openings in the national economy has exceeded the number of unemployed Americans, something that's not been recorded prior to April since records have been kept. So starting this past year, there are literally more people searching to be able to find other opportunities than there are opportunities out there because there are so many jobs open. So many companies are still trying to be able to hire and looking for people that people have the opportunity to stay at their same job, get better pay, or to be able to switch to a new job and to be able to get opportunities. That's providing more opportunities for more people to be able to transition to a new job or make more money at their own job. Well, what's happened on wages? As a result of what's happening in the economy, wages have gone up 2.9% just since the tax cut. That's individual wages have gone up. What happens to income during that time period? Excuse me. Let me go back to the Obama time period. When President Obama was president, on average, income went up 1.8%. That's total take home. Since the tax reform, income has gone up 4% for each American. That is double the amount during the Obama administration. Again, this is not an accident of history. This is the result of the tax reform. This is what happens when people are allowed to be able to keep more of their own money and to be able to spend it. More companies are doing better, there's more investment happening, more job opportunities, more opportunity to get a different job or to get a raise at your current job, and take-home pay has increased. What's happened in people's taxes? Well, early on, the stories, as I referenced before, early on this year were all about how tax returns were down. And they searched out to find anyone to have tax returns were down. And all those stories disappeared in late February when the IRS brought out the latest numbers, not from January and early February, but from February and March, and said, actually, tax returns are up this year from what they were in the previous year. As of the latest number, April 5, tax returns for individuals are almost dead even exact as they were last year. So the stories have disappeared from headlines that their tax returns changed because the IRS continues to report the facts. Actually, the returns are almost exactly what they were from the previous time. So what's happened to actually how people in their paying of their taxes? Well, I started asking some of my team in Oklahoma, just ask people around. When you're traveling around the state and when you're visiting people, just ask them how their taxes have gone. What's happened? Because people are filing now, just find out what's going on. One of the dry cleaners in Enid let our team know that he is doing better in his small business taxes this year, and he's actually going to be able to put a down payment now on some brand new equipment at his dry cleaner in Enid. We had another one that we talked to. He's in his early 30s, married. He and his wife both work. They said that they saved enough on their taxes this year from last year. They're going to start paying off some of their student loans and start paying down faster their car loan. We spoke to one of the gentlemen who's also in his late 30s. They have one child who was born this past year. They said they have saved enough in their taxes from the previous year that they're going to be able to take care of some health care costs that they had, and they're going to start setting aside some money to allow his wife to start a Roth IRA account, starting their savings for their retirement in their 30s, where you should start savings for your retirement. They're able to do this year because of the change in the tax cut. We had another gentleman that we talked to that works in Oklahoma City. He reported that his withholding changes that happened, that he is now actually he was in the 25% tax bracket, that now has moved to the 22% tax bracket, and he is using his savings to be able to take care of some of the issues that he had in his own personal debt. We have a married couple in Davis, Oklahoma, down in south central Oklahoma. Their income actually went up $4,000 this last year. When they finished all their tax payments, their tax actually decreased by $700 from one year to the next, even though their income went up. Another couple down the street from Davis in Sulphur, Oklahoma, they own a small farm. Their income went up $7,000 last year from the previous year, and they were panicked about what would happen on their taxes. Well, their taxes actually decreased $1,400 from the year before. We have a police officer in Norman, Oklahoma, just south of Oklahoma City. He and his family, after they finished filing all their taxes, he said this, I now bring home more in my check every 2 weeks because of the change in the tax code. It's making things so much simpler for us to be able to make ends meet. There was a teacher at an elementary school that she noted, as simple as this may sound, that she has received $10 more every single time a paycheck came out, and that made a difference for her as a first-year teacher just getting started. There's a farmer with 2 kids. He was able to use the new child tax credits, and although his income was higher than the year before, his tax burden was $3,000 less. There's a pilot married to a nurse in our state. Their income actually increased in the past year as well, but he said with the lower tax rates and the child tax credits, their tax burden also decreased by $1,000 from the year before. All these are real-life stories of what's really going on in the state. And as I hear all the different stories that come out, people lose track of the fact of what's really happening. And while some of my colleagues have been so focused on trying to find some way to be able to damage the effect of tax cuts, families in my state know the difference. One of the families that we encountered this past week made a comment that they had a child to be born in 2018. That child was born in 2018, but actually very premature. Their medical bills racked up pretty quickly because the child was in the NICU. But then they started filing their taxes this year as the medical bills are coming in. By the way, their child's doing well and healthy. But as they started filling out all their forms and were thinking about some of their bills to be able to cover their deductible, their tax bill came back in and they saw their taxes lower, and they're using their higher return this year to be able to offset the medical costs from the early delivery of their child. This is what tax reform looks like. Some of my colleagues try to spend all of their time saying tax reform is all about big corporations and Wall Street. Interestingly enough, most of the high-income folks in my state have said actually their taxes went up a little bit this year, not down. They're part of that 5% of Americans that didn't end up with a tax change. But for the vast majority of Americans who are working and putting ends together and taking care of their family, in my state and in other states, they're finding the tax reform is not some theory to them. It was real help to their family in paying off debt, starting retirement, taking care of medical costs, taking care of their family, and getting going on with life. As the police officer in Norman said, just making things a little simpler. Tax reform is determined to be able to help our economy and to get us growing and to get us going as a nation and provide more opportunities. And I'm grateful, even in all the complexity of filling out tax forms, is showing a real result in pragmatic ways to Americans. This past weekend, I stopped and filled out my tax information, going through all the details and gathering all the forms and filling everything out. It's still a pain, and it's still not the most pleasant experience in all of life, filling out your tax forms. But at the end of it, I reflected on some of these direct stories and realized there are people that really do feel the real effects of what's going on, and understanding all the frustration of filling out taxes, which is a pain for everybody. There is some real benefit this year versus the year before, and I hope for the years to come. With that, I yield the floor.